Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Many Minds of Halcyon. This is Dr. Yamilka.
And I'm Rosie Pappas. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Today, we're going to talk about something that is very, I said, present at the moment, and that's setting boundaries with family.
Mhm.
I feel like all of us, at some point or another, have been kind of caught in that tornado of expectations during holidays that
Yeah.
can come up, and how draining or stressful and anxiety provoking that can be for some of us. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's relevant all times of
Hmm.
year, right? But especially around the
Hmm.
holidays. There's can be so much pressure,
Yeah.
maybe to spend more time with family or to spend
Hmm.
more, like money or just to show up in a particular way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So we don't have to, I guess there are options or ways that we can reduce some of that stress,
Mm.
some of that. I think the expectations sometimes can be external, but also sometimes can be just internal. So from within ourselves, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I have a friend named Kelly
Hmm.
Haddix in the mental health field who also
Hmm.
says that, like, with family, we
Hmm.
revert to factory setting, right? Which is like, like the ways that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
kind of developed to navigate family dynamics. And
Mhm,
so we
mhm,
can kind of feel like, why am I a full grown adult and I
mhm.
feel like a kid again, or I
Yeah,
feel like I have to people please when I feel like I'm way beyond that in most of my
yeah,
relationships or
mhm,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't mind sharing. I feel like when I go home to my family, I always joke about it. I'm like, I go home because I want to be a kid again.
Mm,
I go home and because I left so young for school.
mhm.
Um, when I go home, I just revert to factory saying I become a child and I want them to take care of me the same way. So I think with that comes a lot of the, beautiful things that can
Mm,
bring, but also some of other stressful things because now you're kind of like in this place that you're going to have to manage that you're a grown up.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it sounds like you have a really lovely relationship with your family. And I also like really love my family a lot. And there are kind of dynamics where I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, is there going to be tension or conflict around this? Or,
Mhm.
like, I think especially around like gift buying, right? Like, is this
Mhm.
something that, you know, is going to
Mhm.
please, right? Like, people pleasing comes up for me a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Are they gonna be happy? Is this gonna be good enough for them?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. The good
And that
enoughness.
is one of those things that come up, you know. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
do have a lovely relationship with my family, but that doesn't mean that none of that is gonna come up at some point.
Hmm.
Like when I go home and I buy presents, I always think about it. Oh, are they gonna like it? Is this gonna be good enough?
Hmm.
Um, so some of those dynamics, like I guess I can relate at some level. I don't know if it's the same, but I can relate.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, out there, a lot of people most likely struggle with very similar dynamics. Maybe it looks different. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes
why
it
don't
can,
we go ahead, Rosie.
I was just going to say, I mean, it can also be kind of on the opposite end, right? Where there
Mm-hmm.
can be avoidance or like shutting down
Mm-hmm.
or just trying
Mm-hmm.
to like shut, yeah, like checking out while you're with family because it feels
Mm-hmm.
like there isn't room to be fully authentic as yourself or,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean that could be also, I guess, one of those ways that people manage
hmm.
um the dynamics, the struggle, the stress that
Yeah.
can come up. I'll disengage. I don't need any of this.
Hmm.
Yeah.
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 I I showed up. Now I'm gonna spend the time on my phone. Right. Or
Right. Yeah, I'm here.
yeah, can't
Yeah.
complain.
I did my part.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we and I don't know if you want to help me or can help me with this. Why don't we define, I was thinking a bit of like what do boundaries look like, as
Mm,
my sense is that oftentimes people think of boundaries, but it's a very vague or like such a broad concept,
mhm,
and it has so many multiple parts at different layers that yeah, I figure maybe spending some time, since we're talking about setting boundaries with family, would be helpful.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of different ways that can look.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, I see it as kind of like this invisible fence, right? Um, that's like, if I were to use imagery, it's like an invisible fence that protects me and maybe protects others, in some capacity. So it's not physical, emotional, um, yeah, mentally just protects and takes care of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a quote, and I wish I remembered who it was from, but there's a quote
Hmm.
that's something along the lines of like, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me at the same time.
I love that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to be completely real, like some families
Hmm.
are not, psychologically healthy enough
Hmm.
to, what am I trying to say? Like to really be fully vulnerable or to have, and some people all the way to the extreme of some people are estranged from family, right? And
Hmm.
that's the only way that they can kind of care for themselves is that their family has so much, dysfunction
Hmm.
that it's harmful for them to be with family. And that can be another kind of grief, especially around the holidays.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, culturally, some families, like the concept of boundaries, what is that? It
Yeah.
could really, it can be seen sometimes by us as resistance when it's just really something that is built within the system of almost non-existent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just want to be mindful of that for people out there that are listening, that, I do understand that this is a concept, is pretty westernized concept, and
Mhm.
in some other cultures they may not look the same.
Yeah.
Yet there are still ways that we practice boundaries, whether we label it boundaries or not.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also kind of like to boil it down to like, what are my yeses and what are my nos, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just no's. What do I need? What do I want?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, right, like as a parent, you can start teaching
Mm-hmm.
kids at such a young age. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to hug
Mm-hmm.
somebody, you don't need to hug somebody. Like that's
Yeah.
our kind of approach in our family,
Mm-hmm.
my family of creation.
Right. And
Yeah.
those are some of those emotional, if we were going to label emotional
Yeah.
boundaries with the kids that we can teach, or
Yeah.
as adults, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're upset, sometimes they're upset, and, just teaching them that they can say, hey, mom, dad, whoever, parent, caregiver, I'm upset right now. I need some time. I'll talk to you later.
Mhm.
Give me some time and I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mean, there are so many different kinds of boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like from physical to emotional to
Mm-hmm.
psychological. And like
Yeah.
I think you mentioned before, sometimes it can be internal, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of in an
Mhm.
IFS lens, I might have a bound.
Mhm.
I've been really like setting a boundary with my parts a lot
Mhm.
lately. Like this is an adult responsibility and you're not going to take that on, like
Yeah.
little inner child part, right? Like this is
Yeah.
I'm not going to parentify you. You're like this is I
Mhm.
get that this anxiety part of me is really wanting to like navigate trying to
Mhm.
please, but like ultimately one of the psychological boundaries I've been trying to set with myself is like I'm not
Yeah.
responsible for other people's
Yeah. You're
emotions.
not responsible. That one is the big one that people struggle with in general. And I'm assuming it comes up a lot during this time.
Mhm.
I know in my practice it comes up quite often. Like how do I manage this internal conflicts or the different parts of myself that are kind of like at odd right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, yeah. And it's like, okay, just sit with those, notice what comes up and notice what's yours and what's not yours. And like you're saying, if it's not your responsibility, why am I gonna take that on?
Mhm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can feel really futile too. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I'm really invested in trying
Mm-hmm.
to please somebody that maybe is going through stuff in life and
Mm-hmm.
it's not all about me, right? Like some
Yeah.
of what loved ones might be going through might be their own kind of
Mhm.
grief and I can be compassionate to myself and
Mhm.
them without feeling like it's on me to fix it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just that example that you're putting can prevent a couple of things. It can prevent the emotional burnout that comes with feeling like you're responsible for a lot of this on your own. And also just setting those boundaries is not taking the burned out possibility away from you, but it's also probably working on improving your relationships with other people because it
Mhm.
shows them respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I see it, right? If I see you and I'm kind and loving towards you, and I know that's your responsibility to carry, not mine, then I'm probably gonna respond very differently
Mm. Yeah,
than if I were to
absolutely.
take it on.
It's much easier to hold space for somebody when you don't feel like you have to
Mhm.
fix it. You know what I mean? Like I see that
Mhm.
in couples a lot that I work
Mhm.
with where it's like maybe part of them might really want to like hold that space and another part of them might feel really responsible and then another part's like
Mhm.
get all of that away from me. I don't want to hear I don't want to hear what you have going
Yeah.
on because I don't want to feel responsible. And then
Mhm.
there can be this like shame around that.
Mhm.
That's
And
such
the
a norm.
guilt.
That's such a common dynamic that
Mhm.
I see. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Time boundaries. Can we talk about that one for a little
That's a
bit?
good one. That's a really good one,
Yes,
especially
time
around
boundaries is a
here.
big one during the holidays.
Yeah.
On the previous episode, we talked about kind of like being able to um, be genuine and authentic to ourselves, while
Mm,
at the same time, I mean, the way I saw it was kind of like finding a balance. How can I be authentic to myself during this time while other loving others in the way that they need to be loved and cared? And
mm.
when I remember that, I was like, time, tick, 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 tick. I feel like they're all very connected
Mhm.
because you can show up to a party and say, "Hey, I'm here, family. I love you all, but at 3 o'clock, I'm out."
Yeah,
Can
totally.
you actually say that?
Mhm.
That's the question. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that one, if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
place where you're not ready to set the boundary, like have compassion with yourself, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
also, there is a certain level of like, it might take time to even admit to yourself, this is the dynamic that I'm in, that I actually really
Yeah.
can only spend so much time with my family, especially around the holidays, because it's so pressured. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's going to disappoint and upset some people. And can I be okay with their emotional reaction to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that's the case, right? Just as an
Mm-hmm.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it also takes time to even figure out like what what are the what are my limits, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that changes every day. Um,
Yeah.
I used to have I had a friend who
Mm-hmm.
used to be like, okay, I'm going to this thing. I know it's going to be activating. Can you call me at
Mm-hmm.
this time? And then it's like you're out, right? Or like
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people like text someone and be like, can you just pretend like you're in a crisis? Like, so I have an excuse to exit or whatever. But I think sometimes setting those expectations up front, if that feels safe to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of like, okay, I love you. I'm really excited to spend the time with you. And also, like, this is the amount of time that I can give to this, right? Like, I need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
leave by 3 o'clock in your example.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what you're describing goes back to, excuse me, that internal
Hmm.
boundary setting and kind of like knowing your different parts and how you manage them
Yeah.
as they come up when you are faced with people in your life that you care about enough to spend time with them,
Hmm.
right? And how do how does my internal how set are those internal boundaries and
Hmm.
how strong are they for me to hold on to those while I'm also setting boundaries with my family or the people I care about, that I'm gonna say, hey, at this time I'm gonna leave. And if the internal boundaries are not strong enough, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of, who knows, emotions will come up. And what you're describing is, who can I find within my family or outside of my family that can be an ally? And who can be my support right now?
Yeah.
Because this is my boundaries. I can only spend this much time with you. So I'm gonna walk away after this. It's quite a lot. Like, but this is why I say, why don't we describe boundaries? Because there are like different parts to it. It's a lot of
Hmm.
systems that actually require the yes or the no's or the maybes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, sometimes it
Mhm,
takes time to be able to build
mhm,
relationships enough with these parts of yourself
mhm,
from self for them to trust that, like,
mhm,
it's going to be okay. Even if these people are disappointed, I will be okay. Like, it's not going to crush
mhm.
me. And, um, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that that takes some time, and that's okay. Like,
Mhm.
don't need to be anywhere that you're not ready to be,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your kind of healing journey. It doesn't need to look any particular way, but also, like, sometimes if I have parts that are really activated, I will literally just be like, you don't have to come. You could just not be there.
Mhm.
And lately that's been, I feel like, a really useful tool, because then my anxious part will just be like, yeah, I don't really want to go to this party. Like,
And just for anyone who's not familiar with IFS,
mhm.
this part, can you maybe just describe a bit, like this part that states is like a part that you recognize that doesn't necessarily want to show up, and then the other parts of your internal system are taking this space and say, I'll show up for you, you can stay
Yeah.
back home.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, I'm just going to show up in self to the best of my
Mm-hmm.
ability. Right. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that there isn't, like, or higher self, or, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
familiar with IFS, right? Like, I'm just going to show up kind of in my highest true self to the best of my ability. Or there might
Mm-hmm.
be parts that are like, like, I think, for example, like, in a recent family kind of gathering, like, I had a apathetic part that was like, I'll be there, I'm there. If it feels like, you're getting, like, subtly, guilt
Yeah.
tripped, like, I'll
Maybe
just not
just.
care for you, and that's great.
Mhm.
I'm happy to do that. And then kind of, the anxious part of me that really wanted to, like,
Yeah.
make sure that I was attuning to and tending to and trying to fix everybody's feelings and trying to keep the peace in the family, was, like, really overwhelmed. And,
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I was driving to that event and just, like, literally, like, soothing that part of myself and kind of reassuring that part of myself that, like, I don't need to do that. And
Yeah.
if if my that part of me that really wants to, like, people please and keep the
Mm-hmm.
peace doesn't want to be there, doesn't need to come.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of compassion. And I
Yeah.
hear a lot of uh, slowing down enough to recognize what's really going on within yourself
Yeah.
so you can be able to show up with compassion and then only show up in the best way you can
Hmm.
while setting those aside and saying, hey, I'll be back for you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I hear. I'll take care of
Totally.
you. Give me
It's also
until 3 o'clock and I promise you I'll be back.
yeah. It's also taken some time, I think, for
Hmm.
for parts of me to trust enough to be able to be
Mhm.
like, yeah, actually I don't want to come and I'm going to stay away and not
Mhm.
like get activated and kind of pull into these old roles.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not perfect and it's not I think it's really
Yeah.
important to me that I hold a lot of compassion for myself when I do revert to factory settings. You know? Like, yeah.
I think it's important for people to like one tip and one takeaway is it's okay to take small steps
Yeah.
towards building up this internal strength of the yes or no's, who do I leave behind, who do I not.
Mhm.
In parts language, I'm not leaving actually physically anybody
Yeah.
behind. Um, and I think it's important though that those really small steps that we take, that we're consistent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's easy to just give up quickly as soon as we notice that we are feeling uncomfortable setting those tiny mini steps of, boundaries, and we reset to factory setting very quickly. So it's a lot
Yeah.
of like trial and error because, I may try something today that I really don't like. So how do I know I'm gonna try it again, and then see, as long as I'm not harming myself, right? In
Yeah.
any way. And then just being consistent and kind.
Yeah. And also like finding the relationships where it might be
Hmm.
safer to experiment with
Yeah.
who I really want to be in the world and
Mhm.
how I actually want to show up. And
Mhm.
okay, this is a friendship where I actually feel like I can say no easier and that
Mhm.
they're like really not going to be upset with me and that feels much safer, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. I think the way I say it oftentimes with clients is you need multiple positive experiences to build up to whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So if you start small with trusted people, um, also making sure that we clearly communicate what is it that we are doing, right? What am I expecting? What am I going to do? What am I not? So it's not confusing to others and to ourselves. Is really important so that the more consistent positive experiences we have, the easier it'll become eventually to just have that as like an inner strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it helps to have kind of structures in place
Mm-hmm.
that pull you in that direction, whether that's therapy or
Mm-hmm.
friendships or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever your kind of tools are.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think there, like you said, consistency is immensely helpful, especially kind of in the
Mm-hmm.
IFS model. I think the more consistently that you're showing up and kind of building this attunement to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
understanding what's coming up for you and why, and, like practicing kind of recentering yourself back in your higher self or your truest
Mm-hmm.
self, right? Like the more that you're kind of building that muscle, the more easy it is to kind of lead from that place. The easier it is for these parts of you that are trying to protect you to trust, like, okay, maybe I don't need to take on the full burden of this, or maybe I
Mm-hmm.
actually don't want to navigate the situation in this way that feels familiar and safe
Mm-hmm.
in a way, but also really not safe, right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like
Mm-hmm.
this is a role I've taken on because I have to take this on instead of kind of
Yeah.
from an empowered place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think there's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote, and I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of like, we have to do the things we're afraid to do. And the more that we do that, the more we
Yeah.
know ourselves to be someone that is able to do that scary thing. Right.
Yeah. 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 So
Yeah.
this just builds a lot of empowerment and knowing of
Mhm.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fear, that's another episode. Fear is such a
Yeah.
big thing.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it can be so scary to try to change
Mm-hmm.
these dynamics. And especially
Yeah.
in family, I think that
Mm-hmm.
it can feel really painful or sad. There's can be
Mm-hmm.
grief for family when you're kind of changing these dynamics and maybe not showing up in the relationship in the same way. And sometimes,
Hmm.
there's more, you take more distance in order to kind of reinforce who you actually want to be. And
Hmm.
that's hard.
That is hard. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's scary. It's scary to
Hmm.
be changing those things when you know that there's an emotional impact on someone that you really love.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Because then you also have to manage their reaction, your own emotions that come up while you're setting those boundaries. You're checking up the system, right? You're disrupting what has been the status quo for I don't know how long.
Mhm.
For everyone is different. And now you're having to manage how they're responding to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you do that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you add kind of the pressure of the holidays on top of
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And that can feel like so much
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because there's
Yeah.
so much pressure to like be a bright and cheery, happy
Mm-hmm.
family when maybe there's like a lot of currents of like
Underlying
tension and
stress. Mm-hmm.
anxiety and yeah, all the
Mm-hmm.
things underneath.
Like a whole year full of dynamics that haven't necessarily been resolved or
Yeah, or a
and
whole
then you show up because it's
30, 40
expected.
years or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not talk for that long and then show up and be cheery and happy. That's a lot on somebody's shoulder.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of things to work through. But I think, takeaways, and I know our time is limited today, is still ultimately is benefiting the family as a whole and
Mhm.
every one of us individually. The clear boundary setting, the healthy boundary settings, not like the avoidance and the detachment, but more of like if you're doing it from a place of intent, like this is intentional, I'm doing this for this healthy way of being that I want to be, or because this is the person I chose to be,
Mhm.
within myself and my relationships. Those are healthy. It takes time, it takes work.
Yeah.
That is important.
Yeah, and it's okay to take your time.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to have compassion for yourself and where you're
Mm-hmm.
at. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think um have compassion for the family that you're in and acceptance of kind of who your family members are. And if that means that like the healthiest thing for you is to be estranged, that's okay too. Like you get to decide what your truth
Mm-hmm.
is. And there's not
Mm-hmm.
like one right way.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Everyone's story is different. So I
Yeah.
think then people should reflect on their own dynamics, their own family, and themselves, and what is it that they need? What
Yeah.
boundaries? What are the yeses and the nos? What are their wants and
Yeah.
their don't wants, or the needs and don't need?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if I could have exactly what I wanted without fear of repercussion, what would that actually look like?
Yeah.
Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if I wasn't afraid of reactions to it, what would my yeses and nos be? What would my
Mm-hmm.
boundaries be? What are my
Mm-hmm.
needs?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah. And it's okay if you're
Yeah.
not there yet, that you can assert those. That's, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yeah, everyone can do it on their own time and terms.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's it for today. I
Yeah.
think this was a short but needed episode given the season of the year
Hmm.
and everyone's gatherings and everyone talking about what are we gonna do or not gonna do during this time. How are things gonna play out? How is so and so gonna relate to X, Y, and Z? And how will I manage that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you liked today's episode, please subscribe and like our video. And
Yes.
again, if you um want us to cover anything in particular, be sure to drop that in the comments below. And we're turning this into a podcast, so
Yes.
keep an eye
And
out for that. That'll be coming soon too.
yes. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Rosie. Until next episode,
Happy holidays.
happy holidays.